The Kashari war fleet materialized at the edge of the Terran system, like a storm made of steel and fire. 300 vessels, each larger than the city, tore through the fabric of space with engines that hummed with the power of captive stars. Admiral Corvin stood on the bridge of the Eternal Judgment, his 4 eyes scanning the tactical displays with the practiced ease of someone who had conquered 47 worlds before breakfast. "Another insignificant species," he muttered, his translator broadcasting his words to the bridge crew. "Scan their defenses. Let's finish this before the cycle ends." The censor officer's mandibles clicked nervously. "Admiral, I'm detecting anomalies." Corvin's attention sharpened. "Elaborate." "The system is heavily fortified. Orbital platforms around every major planet. Minefield densities that exceed military doctrine. And their fleet." The officer paused. "Sir, their fleet is moving to intercept. All of it." A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. The idea that anyone would commit their entire military force to a single battle was either desperation or stupidity. The Kashari had learned long ago that civilizations fell not through one decisive battle, but through the slow grinding of resources and morale. Total commitment meant total vulnerability. "Display their fleet composition," Corvin ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, and the bridge fell silent. 1,200 ships. Not the ragtag collection of patrol craft and civilian conversions they'd expected from a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. These were warships, purpose-built, heavily armed, and arranged in formations that spoke of doctrine and discipline. The humans had positioned themselves between the Kashari fleet and the inner system, blocking all approach vectors with overlapping fields of fire. "They're making a stand," Corvin said slowly. "How refreshing." His tactical officer leaned forward. "Admiral, their vessels are significantly smaller than ours. Tonnage analysis suggests we outmass them 5-1. Shall I prepare the standard breakthrough formation?" Corvin considered the display. The humans had arranged their fleet in layers. Lighter ships forward, heavier vessels in support positions, with what appeared to be carrier groups holding the flanks. It was textbook defensive doctrine, the kind taught in every military academy across the galaxy. Competent, but ultimately futile against Kashari superiority. "Signal the fleet. Standard engagement protocols. We'll demonstrate why resistance is pointless, and they'll surrender within the hour. Proceed." The Kashari fleet moved forward, engines blazing, weapons charging. They had done this dance 1,000 times across 1,000 worlds. The script never changed. Overwhelming force met desperate defiance, and defiance always broke. The distance closed. 1,000,000 kilometers. 500,000. 200,000. The human fleet held position. Corvin felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in decades. Uncertainty. In his 3 centuries of service, prey always ran when predators approached. Always. The instinct was universal, coded into the survival mechanisms of every sentient species. You could hide, you could negotiate, you could pray to whatever god your people invented. But you didn't stand still while death approached. "Sir, we're within optimal firing range. Weapons free. Target their forward line. Break them." The Eternal Judgment and its sister ships opened fire. Lance beams, weapons that shattered planetary shields and boiled oceans, streaked across the void. Missiles capable of cracking moons accelerated toward the human formations. The raw firepower was enough to sterilize a continent in seconds. The human fleet vanished. Not destroyed. Not scattered. Vanished. "Report." Corvin's voice cut through confusion on the bridge. "They've dispersed, sir. Individual ships executing independent evasion patterns. I've never seen acceleration curves like that. They're moving like fighter craft, not capital ships." The tactical display became chaos. 1,200 contacts split into 1,200 vectors, each ship moving on seemingly random trajectories at accelerations that should have turned their crews into paste against the bulkheads. The beautiful, orderly formation dissolved into a swarm that defied prediction. And then the swarm struck back. Missiles erupted from the scattered human fleet. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands. They came from every angle, saturating the Kashari Point defense networks. Behind them came kinetic projectiles, laser fire, particle beams, and weapons the Kashari sensors didn't even recognize. The humans weren't fighting like a conventional fleet. They were fighting like a school of piranha that had just tasted blood. The Eternal Judgment shuddered as impacts rippled across its shields. Minor damage, nothing critical, but the sheer volume of incoming fire was staggering. Corvin watched as two of his lighter cruisers, ships that had served in 50 campaigns, disappeared in expanding spheres of plasma. "They're targeting our formation structure," his tactical officer shouted, "cutting off our lighter vessels from capital ship support. Sir, they're hunting in packs." 3 human destroyers materialized from the chaos, engines screaming, weapons blazing. They focused fire on a Kashari battlecruiser, hammering its shields from 3 angles simultaneously. When the shields failed, they didn't bother with kill shots. They crippled the ship's engines and moved on, leaving it dead in space while they selected their next victim. Corvin's mandibles ground together. Reform the fleet. Tighten formation. We need mutual support. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the inner system. The humans are bringing up reinforcements. Heavy reinforcements." New contacts bloomed on the display. Orbital fortresses, each bristling with enough firepower to challenge a dreadnought, had broken orbit and were accelerating toward the battle. Behind them came a second wave of human ships, these ones even larger than the first wave, moving with a deliberate purpose of executioners approaching the gallows. For the first time in 300 years of service, Admiral Corvin felt a cold touch of doubt. The humans weren't supposed to fight like this. They weren't supposed to have this many ships, this much firepower, this level of coordination. The intelligence reports had called them a minor species, barely worth the effort of conquest. The intelligence reports had been catastrophically wrong. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and Admiral Corvin's certainty had transformed into something he refused to name. The Kashari Empire didn't retreat. Retreat was a concept reserved for lesser species, for civilizations that lacked the will to see conquest through to an inevitable conclusion. Yet as he watched another of his heavy cruisers rupture from concentrated human fire, Corvin found himself considering the unthinkable. "Casualties?" he demanded. His tactical officer's voice was hollow. 43 ships destroyed, 71 damaged beyond combat effectiveness. The humans have lost approximately 200 vessels, but... He trailed off, mandibles twitching with stress. "But what?" "Sir, they're not slowing down. Standard doctrine suggests a force suffering such losses should be experiencing morale collapse. The humans are fighting harder now than when the engagement began." Corvin studied the tactical display with growing disbelief. The human fleet had abandoned all pretense of conventional warfare. Their ships moved in 3-dimensional formations that seemed to flow like liquid, concentrating overwhelming force on isolated Kashari vessels before dispersing into the void. They used a debris field, wreckage from both sides, as cover, as weapons, as tactical advantages. One human corvette had actually rammed a Kashari destroyer, its crew deliberately sacrificing themselves to create an opening for their allies. It was madness. It was effective. "Fleet-wide communication," Corvin ordered. "All ships, withdraw to Rally Point Sigma. We're pulling back to regroup." The admission tasted like poison, but survival demanded adaptation. The Kashari hadn't conquered half the galaxy by being inflexible. They would withdraw, analyze these unexpected tactics, and return with overwhelming force. This was merely a temporary setback. The human fleet had other ideas. As the Kashari began their withdrawal, human destroyers surged forward, harrying their retreat with suicidal aggression. They didn't try to prevent the withdrawal. They made it costly. Every kilometer the Kashari retreated cost them another ship, another 100 lives, another piece of their aura of invincibility. The humans were sending a message written in fire and blood. There will be no safe retreat from human space. The Eternal Judgment was among the last pulled back, its massive engines burning at maximum output. Behind them, the human-heavy battleships, the ones that had arrived as reinforcements, finally opened fire. Their weapons were different from the lighter vessels. These were siege cannons, designed not for ship-to-ship combat, but for cracking orbital fortifications. When they struck Kashari shields. The impacts register across every sensor on the battlefield. Jump drive charging, his navigator reported. 30 seconds to transition. Corvin watched the human fleet grow smaller on his display. They weren't pursuing beyond their initial defensive perimeter. They were holding position, maintaining formation, showing discipline that rivaled the Kashari's own. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had never seen anything like it. The eternal judgment and the remnants of the invasion fleet tore open holes in reality and vanished into faster-than-light transit. Behind them, the human fleet remained, an immovable barrier between the Kashari Empire and humanity's worlds. Aboard the TRSC Indomitable, Fleet Admiral Sarachin stood on the bridge, surrounded by exhausted officers and crew. The battle had cost them dearly. 217 ships, over 40,000 lives. But they had done what every intelligence analyst in human space had said was impossible. They had stopped the Kashari. Casualty reports coming in, Admiral. Her executive officer said quietly. Final numbers should be available within the hour. Chin nodded, her face expressionless. She would grieve later. Right now, she had a job to finish. Status of the Kashari fleet? Retreated to deep space, beyond our sensor range. They took heavy losses. Our analysts estimate at least 40 ships destroyed, possibly more damaged. Admiral, we hurt them. Badly. Not badly enough. Chun pulled up the strategic display, showing not just the Terran system, but the surrounding sectors. They'll be back, probably with reinforcements. The Kashari don't forgive, and they don't forget. We've just made ourselves their primary target. Her tactical officer, Commander Park, stepped forward. His uniform was scorched from a plasma conduit rupture, but his eyes were bright with fierce pride. Then let them come. We'll be ready. Chen allowed herself a thin smile. Yes, we will. Signal all commands. I want every ship refitted and rearmed within 72 hours. Bring up the reserve fleets from Sol, New Terra, and Proxima. Strip the convoy escorts if you have to. Everything we have needs to be here when they return. Admiral, the Kashari Empire spans 200 systems. Their total military forces outnumber us at least 20 to 1. If they commit even a fraction of their available fleets, then we'll stack their corpses so high they'll see them from their homeworld. Chen interrupted, her voice cold as vacuum. Commander, humanity has been preparing for this moment since we first detected the Kashari conquering the Velosian Compact 60 years ago. We've watched them butcher 37 civilizations. We've studied their tactics, analyzed their technology, prepared our defenses. They think we're just another victim species. They're about to learn different. She turned to address the entire bridge crew. Send a message to every ship in the fleet, every station in the system, every human listening. Today, we prove that the Kashari can bleed. We prove they can be beaten. But this was just round 1. They'll analyze what we did, adapt their tactics, and come back harder. So we adapt faster. We train harder. We build more ships, develop better weapons, and when they return, we hit them so hard their empire trembles. The bridge erupted in cheers, exhaustion temporarily forgotten. Chun let them have their moment. They'd earned it. But she knew the truth that none of them wanted to face. The Kashari had been testing them, probing their defenses. What came next wouldn't be a vanguard fleet. It would be extermination. Her communications officer interrupted the celebration. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across human space. The Colonial Alliance wants to send reinforcements. The Belt Confederacy is mobilizing its defense fleet. Even the isolationists on Kepler Station are volunteering ships. He paused, emotion cracking his professional demeanor. Ma'am, everyone wants a fight. Chan felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Humanity had always been fractious, divided by politics and ideology and old grudges. But when threatened, when faced with an enemy that wanted nothing less than their complete subjugation, humans had a tendency to remember what mattered. Accept all offers. Coordinate with fleet operations. I want an integrated defense network covering every approach vector within 2 weeks. She glanced at the main display, where the debris field from the battle still glowed. And get me intelligence. I need to know everything about the Kashari. their command structure, their supply lines, their homeworld. If we're going to war with an empire, we need to know how to kill it. The Kashari High Council convened in the Grand Chamber of Eternal Victory, a space designed to intimidate and inspire. Holographic displays show the Empire's vast holdings, 214 conquered systems, 3,000 subjugated species, military might that have remained unchallenged for 3 centuries. But today, the Chamber's atmosphere was thick with tension that no amount of grandeur could dispel. Supreme Commander Vrake stood at the center, his ornate armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Around him, the 12 council members waited in silence, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed rage. Above them all floated the tactical recording of the Terran system battle, playing on an endless loop. "Explain," Vrake said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Explain how a single fleet, commanded by one of our most decorated admirals, was repelled by a species we classified as negligible." Admiral Corvin stood ramrod straight, his military bearing perfect despite the shame burning through him. "Supreme Commander, the intelligence assessment was fundamentally flawed. The humans are not a minor species. Their industrial capacity, their fleet strength, their tactical sophistication, all exceed our projections by orders of magnitude." "Projections?" Council Member Thress spat the word like venom. "We base our conquests on facts, Admiral, not guesswork. You had 300 ships, the finest vessels in our armada, and you retreated." "I preserved the fleet," Corvin replied, his voice tight. "Complete engagement would have resulted in total destruction. The humans weren't defending. They were hunting. Every tactical doctrine we employed, they had a counter prepared. It was as if they had studied us for decades." "Impossible," another council member interjected. "We've had no contact with this species. How could they? They've been watching." The voice came from the shadows at the chamber's edge. Intelligence Director Carvis emerged, her movements deliberate and precise. "For 63 standard cycles, since we conquered the Velosian Compact, the humans had trade relations with the Velosians. They observed our conquest through long-range sensors, recovered survivors, interrogated prisoners. While we dismissed them as irrelevant, they were studying us, learning, preparing." The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. A species had watched the Kashari war machine, understood it, and built their entire military strategy around defeating it. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever survived long enough to try. Supreme Commander Vrakesh's mandibles ground together. "Show me the analysis." Carvis activated a holographic display. "The human military operates on principles alien to our doctrine. We fight through overwhelming force and centralized command. They fight through distributed networks and independent action. Our ships are powerful but predictable. Their ships are weaker individually but tactically unpredictable. We view warfare as inevitable conquest. They view it as survival requiring any sacrifice." "You're saying they're willing to die," Thress said slowly. "I'm saying they're eager to die if it means taking us with them," Carvis corrected. "During the engagement, 17 human ships conducted suicide attacks, not in panic or desperation, as calculated tactical decisions. They trade their lives for strategic advantages without hesitation. This is not a species that will surrender, no matter the cost." Vrake studied the tactical playback, watching human ships weave through Kashari formations like predators bred for this exact moment. "Casualties inflicted?" 217 human vessels confirmed destroyed, approximately 42,000 casualties. Current intelligence suggests they had minimal impact on overall human military capacity. The humans have at least 4,000 warships across their territories, with industrial facilities capable of replacing losses within months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. For 1,000 ships. The Kashari had conquered civilizations 10 times that size, but none had ever been this prepared, this coordinated, this willing to pay the price of resistance. "Recommendations," Rakes commanded. "We have 3 options," Carvis replied. "First, withdraw. Abandon this conquest and focus on consolidating our existing territory. Second, commit to total war. Mobilize the full might of the Empire and reduce human civilization to ash. Third, negotiate. Establish borders and avoid conflict. The Kashari Empire does not negotiate. Thress snarled. We do not withdraw. We conquer. It is a foundation of everything we are. Then we choose total war, Vrake said quietly. And we accept that it will be costly. He turned to Corvin. Admiral, you're being reassigned. Not as punishment, but because you have combat experience against these humans. I'm giving you command of the 3rd Extermination Fleet, 1,000 ships. You will return to the Terran system, and you will break them. No mercy, no restraint. Show them why civilizations fear the Kashari name. Corvin felt ice settle in his gut. 1,000 ships. It was a force large enough to conquer entire sectors. The fact that Vrake considered it necessary spoke volumes about how seriously the High Council was taking the human threat. It will be done, Supreme Commander. Deep in human space, aboard the orbital shipyard designated Construction Facility 7, Admiral Chin walked through corridors that hummed with activity. Through observation windows, she could see the skeletal frames of warships taking shape. New vessels being born to replace those lost in the battle. Hundreds of thousands of workers, human and synthetic, labored around the clock to feed humanity's desperate need for military strength. Captain James Rodriguez fell into step beside her, his datapad glowing with reports. Production is ahead of schedule. The civilian shipyards have converted to military contracts. We'll have 300 new ships operational within 2 months, another 500 within 6. Not enough, Chin said flatly. Intelligence indicates the Kashari are mobilizing a major fleet. We bloodied their nose, and now they're bringing the hammer. How many ships can we field if they attack tomorrow? If we strip every system of defensive assets and commit everything, maybe 3,000 combat-capable vessels. But, Admiral, that would leave our colonies completely vulnerable. Our colonies are dead anyway if we lose the next battle. The Kashari don't leave survivors. She stopped at an observation deck, overlooking construction yards. The math is simple, James. We can't outproduce them. We can't match their numbers. We can't win a conventional war. So we don't fight conventionally. Rodriguez glanced at her sharply. What are you proposing? The Kashari control 200 systems. That's 200 supply lines, 200 potential targets, 200 places they have to defend. They're strong, but strength requires logistics. Cut the logistics, and strength becomes irrelevant. She pulled up a star chart on her personal display. We've been analyzing their empire's structure. Most conquered species are enslaved, forced to produce resources and materials. The Kashari homeworld and core systems rely on a continuous flow of goods from the frontier. What happens if that flow stops? You want to attack their supply chains, Rodriguez breathed. Admiral, that would require striking deep into their territory. Suicide missions. Suicide missions are what humans do best, apparently, Chin replied with dark humor. The Kashari think this is about the Terran system. They think if they break our defenses here, we'll collapse like every other species they've conquered. They're wrong. This isn't about territory. It's about survival. And humans will burn the galaxy down before we let ourselves be enslaved. She turned to face him directly. I need volunteers. People willing to take fast ships into Kashari space and hit targets the Empire thinks are untouchable. Raiders, saboteurs, guerrilla fighters who make the Kashari bleed for every system they hold. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment, understanding the weight of what she was asking. You want to turn this into a war of attrition. Make them question whether conquering us is worth the cost. More than that, Chin said, her eyes reflecting the lights of a dozen ships under construction. I want to make them afraid. The Kashari have spent 3 centuries as apex predators. It's time they remembered what it feels like to be prey. Within 72 hours, the call went out across human space. It wasn't broadcast on official channels or dressed up in patriotic rhetoric. It was a simple message sent through military networks. Volunteers needed for operations beyond enemy lines. Survival not guaranteed. Glory not promised. Only the chance to hurt the enemy where it mattered most. 15,000 people responded within the first day. Chun personally reviewed the applicants, selecting not the most decorated or experienced, but those who demonstrated the specific qualities needed for what she had in mind: adaptability, ruthlessness, and the ability to operate without support or hope of rescue. By the end of the week, she had her raiders, 200 ships, each crewed by individuals who understood they were being sent to die, and went anyway. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb stood in the briefing room of the destroyer Phantom, looking at the faces of his crew, 37 men and women who had volunteered to take their ship into the heart of Kashari territory and strike at targets that conventional wisdom said were untouchable. The average age was 26. Most had families. None expected to see them again. Our target, Webb began, projecting a holographic image, is a Kashari logistics hub in the Draken sector. It coordinates supply shipments for 17 conquered systems, processing raw materials and routing them to manufacturing centers closer to the core. Intelligence estimates destroying it would disrupt approximately 12% of their military production capacity for at least 6 months. One of his officers, Lieutenant Park, raised her hand. "Sir, the Draken sector is 15 jumps deep into Kashari space. Even if we successfully destroy the target, how do we get back?" "We don't," Webb said simply. "This is a one-way mission. We go in, we hit them as hard as we can, and if we're lucky, we take a few of their ships with us on the way out. The goal isn't survival. The goal is damage." The briefing room remained silent. Webb had expected fear, maybe protest. Instead, he saw acceptance. These people had known what they were signing up for. The Kashari had made it clear that humanity's options were submission or extinction. These 37 had chosen a third option: defiance at any cost. "We launch in 6 hours," Webb continued. "Use the time to send messages home. Square away your affairs. Make peace with whatever god you believe in. When we cross into Kashari space, we're ghosts. No call for help, no surrender, no retreat. We're going to show these bastards that humanity doesn't go quietly." The raiding campaign began 3 weeks after Admiral Corvin received his new command, while he assembled a third extermination fleet, a process requiring coordination across dozens of systems. Human strike forces began appearing deep inside Kashari territory, like a virus infiltrating a body. The first attack hit a mining operation in the Velar system. 3 human corvettes materialized from jump space, launched a devastating barrage of missiles at the orbital processing stations, and vanished before Kashari defense forces could respond. 40,000 tons of refined metals, destined for warship construction, burned in the planet's atmosphere. The second attack targeted a fuel depot. The third, a manufacturing complex. The fourth, a communications relay. Each strike was surgical, devastating, and carried out by ships that fought with the desperation of the damned. When Kashari defense forces finally managed to intercept one of the raiding parties, they found humans who fought to the last breath, who rammed their ships into Kashari vessels when their weapons ran dry, who denied their enemies even the satisfaction of prisoners. Supreme Commander Vrakes watched the reports pile up with growing fury. 17 separate attacks in 2 weeks. The raiders were coordinating their strikes to maximize disruption, hitting systems simultaneously across the Empire to prevent reinforcement. The economic impact was already measurable. Supply chains were faltering, military production was slowing, and conquered species were beginning to whisper about rebellion. "How are they penetrating so deeply into our territory?" he demanded. Intelligence Director Carvis pulled up sensor data. "Their ships are smaller and faster than our patrol craft. They're using jump routes through areas we consider too dangerous for standard navigation. Stellar phenomena, dense asteroid fields, regions near neutron stars. They're accepting casualty rates that would be unthinkable in conventional warfare. Some of these raiders never even reach their targets. They're destroyed by navigation hazards. But enough get through that the campaign continues. Then increase patrols. Fortify every system along the frontier. We've already redeployed 200 ships from the 3rd Extermination Fleet to defensive duties. Pulling more would delay Admiral Corvin's offensive against the Terran system by months." Vraksha's mandibles clicked in agitation. The humans were forcing impossible choices: defend the Empire's infrastructure or prosecute the war, protect supply lines or maintain offensive capability. Every ship diverted to defense was a ship not available for conquest. The raiders weren't winning battles. They were bleeding the Empire of its ability to wage war. What are our losses? Carvis hesitated. Material losses are sustainable. The raids have destroyed approximately 4% of our industrial capacity. However, there are secondary effects. 3 subjugated species have launched uprisings, inspired by human resistance. We've had to deploy ground forces to suppress rebellions that were previously considered pacified. Morale among garrison troops is declining. They fear being isolated and destroyed by human raiders. And the political impact within the High Council. The Council questions my leadership, Vrake finished. They wonder if the humans are a threat we should have avoided. Some are suggesting negotiation. The word hung in the air like heresy. The Kashari Empire had been built on the principle of absolute conquest. To negotiate was to admit equality, to acknowledge that an enemy could resist successfully. It would undermine 3 centuries of imperial ideology. No negotiation. Vrake said firmly, Admiral Corvin will crush the human home fleet. Once their military is broken, these raiders will have nowhere to return, no basis to resupply. They'll be isolated and hunted down. The campaign continues. Lieutenant Commander Webb's destroyer emerged from jump space in the Draken sector. Alarms immediately screaming warnings. The system was more heavily defended than intelligence had suggested. 3 Kashari patrol cruisers and a network of automated defense platforms. The Phantom had seconds to act before those defenses turned their full attention to the intruder. All weapons free. Target the logistics hub. Everything we have. Webb shouted. The Phantom was dying before it finished its attack run. Kashari lance beams carved through its hull, venting atmosphere and killing crew. But the ship's missiles were already away, and Webb had trained his people well. The warhead streaked toward the massive orbital station that coordinated supply shipments for 17 systems, each missile programmed to penetrate deep before detonating. Webb watched the station begin to break apart, secondary explosions rippling through its structure as fuel reserves ignited. 12% of Kashari military production gone. Thousands of enemy personnel dead. Months of strategic advantage purchased with 37 human lives. Sir, engineering is gone. Life support failing. Weapons offline, his tactical officer reported, her voice eerily calm. Then we improvise, Webb said, angling the dying destroyer toward the nearest Kashari cruiser. The range closed rapidly, 1,000 meters, 500, 200. The Kashari ship tried to evade, but the Phantom was already committed, its engines screaming one final time. The collision registered across every sensor in the system. 2 ships, locked together in mutual destruction, tumbling through space as their reactors failed catastrophically. The explosion was visible from the planet below, a new star burning briefly in the night sky. Across Kashari space, similar stories were unfolding. Human raiders struck and died, fought and burned, each ship a small candle of defiance against the darkness of empire. Individually, they were insignificant. Collectively, they were changing the mathematics of war. Admiral Corvin stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Dreadnought Universe's End, and gazed upon a fleet that represented the single largest military concentration in Kashari history. 1,000 warships stretched across the void in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons capable of scouring planets clean of life. This was the force that would break humanity, that would remind the galaxy why the Kashari were feared. Yet, as he reviewed the tactical reports, Corvin felt no satisfaction. The raiding campaign had cost the Empire dearly, not just in materials and infrastructure, but in something more intangible and perhaps more valuable. The aura of invincibility. Across conquered territories, whispers of human resistance had sparked rebellions that required brutal suppression. Ships that should have been part of his fleet were instead scattered across 200 systems, chasing ghosts and protecting supply lines. The humans had done something no species had managed in 3 centuries. They had made the Kashari afraid. All ships report ready for jump, his navigation officer announced. Course plotted for the Terran system. Estimated transit time, 47 hours. Corvin nodded slowly. Signal the fleet. We proceed as planned. When we arrive, there will be no negotiation, no quarter, no mercy. The humans will learn that resistance only delays the inevitable. The massive armada tore open holes in reality and vanished, leaving empty space behind. 47 hours until they reached humanity's doorstep. 47 hours until the largest battle in galactic history would begin. Admiral Chin received the alert while reviewing defensive preparations in the command center of Orbital Station Prime. The gravitational sensors had detected massive spatial distortions consistent with a fleet transition, far larger than anything humanity had ever encountered. The computers calculated fleet strength based on the distortion signatures and displayed a number that made her blood run cold. 1,000 ships. Minimum. Sound general alert, she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear trying to claw its way up her throat. All fleets to battle stations. Activate every defensive platform, every mine, every trap we prepared. Signal all civilian traffic to evacuate immediately. This is it. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers executed contingency plans that had been refined over weeks of preparation. Chin pulled up the strategic display, studying the dispositions of her forces. 3,000 human warships, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Orbital fortresses that bristle with weapons. Minefields dense enough to shred unshielded vessels. Every trick, every advantage, every desperate measure they could devise. It still might not be enough. Captain Rodriguez appeared at her side, his face grim. The raiding fleets are too deep in Kashari territory to recall in time. We're on our own. We always were, Chin replied. The raiders' job was to buy us time and make the Kashari pay for every system they hold. Our job is to make them pay for this one. Status of the new weapons. The kinetic kill platforms are operational. Gravity well generators are charged and ready. The experimental weapons, Admiral, we've only had 3 weeks to test them. There's no guarantee they'll work as designed. Then we'll find out together. She activated fleet-wide communications, her voice broadcasting to every ship, every station, every human preparing to fight. This is Admiral Chun. In approximately 45 hours, the Kashari Empire will arrive with overwhelming force. They expect us to break. They expect us to surrender. They think we're just another species to be conquered and enslaved. They're wrong. She paused, choosing her words carefully. These might be the last words some of these people ever heard. Humanity has always been at our best when our backs are against the wall. We've faced extinction before, plague, war, environmental collapse, and every time we've found a way to survive. Not because we're stronger or smarter than our enemies, but because we refuse to quit. Because when someone tells us submission is inevitable, we spit in their face and fight anyway. The Kashari have conquered 200 systems. Today, they learn that the 201st will cost them everything. Across the fleet, on ships of every class and configuration, crews prepared for battle. Engineers performed final checks on weapon systems. Pilots ran simulations on evasion patterns. Medical teams readied triage centers for casualties that would inevitably come. And in quiet moments, soldiers recorded messages for families they might never see again, pouring love and hope and desperate defiance into words that might be their last. The Kashari fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of the Terran system, like an avalanche made of metal and malice. 1,000 ships, arranged in attack formations that had been perfected over centuries of conquest. Admiral Corvin studied the sensor displays, noting the human defensive positions with professional interest. They had learned from the first battle, tightened their formations, prepared layered defenses. It would not save them. All ships advance. Standard conquest protocol. Sweep aside their defenses and establish orbital superiority. The humans end today. The massive armada began moving forward, engines burning bright enough to be seen from Earth's surface. The distance of the human fleet closed steadily. 5 million kilometers for million, 3 million. The humans held position, not advancing to meet them but waiting with ominous patience. At 2 million kilometers, the first mines detonated. They weren't conventional explosives. The humans had seeded the approach vectors with gravity well generators, devices that created localized distortions in space-time. When Kashari ships entered the affected zones, their navigation systems went haywire. Their jump drives shut down automatically to prevent catastrophic misjumps and their formations began to scatter as ships lost synchronized movement. Deploy countermeasures. Restore formation integrity. Corvin barked, but even as he gave the order, he knew the humans had merely opened with their first move in a complex game. The human fleet surged forward, not as a unified mass, but as 100 independent strike groups, each targeting Kashari vessels that had been isolated by the gravity well traps. They came in fast and low, using the spatial distortions as cover, and when they opened fire, it was with weapons Corvin had never seen before. Railguns that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, too fast for point defense systems to track. Directed energy weapons that pulse in frequencies designed to resonate with Kashari shield harmonics, causing cascading failures. And most terrifying of all, kinetic kill platforms, enormous masses that have been accelerated to tremendous velocities and simply aimed at Kashari capital ships like bullets from the gods themselves. The universe's end shuddered as one such projectile grazed its shields, the impact releasing energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. Corvin watched 3 of his battle cruisers disappear in blinding flashes as kinetic kills struck home, their shields failing under impacts that converted velocity into pure devastation. Return fire. All batteries engage. Show them the power of the Kashari Empire. The fleet responded with fury, lance beams and missiles filling the void with deadly light. Human ships died by the dozens, overwhelmed by sheer firepower, but for every human vessel destroyed, the survivors fought harder. They weren't trying to win through superior force. They were trying to make victory so expensive that the Kashari would question whether conquest was worth the price. Hours passed. The battle became a grinding meat grinder of ships and lives, both sides trading casualties in exchanges that would have been unthinkable in any previous conflict. The human fleet was smaller now, reduced to perhaps 1,800 functional vessels, but they had destroyed nearly 200 Kashari ships and damaged hundreds more. And then Admiral Chen played her final card. Activate the stellar ignition sequence, she commanded quietly. Deep in the asteroid belt, devices that humanity had spent 6 months building came online. They were massive fusion generators, each one capable of initiating a sustained reaction in hydrogen-rich materials. The humans had seeded select asteroids with hydrogen fuel and aimed them on carefully calculated trajectories. When the generators activated, those asteroids became temporary stars. The sudden burst of radiation and heat caught the Kashari fleet in a crossfire of stellar phenomena. Ships that had positioned themselves to engage human forces suddenly found themselves bathed in radiation, levels normally only encountered near main sequence stars. Shields designed to deflect weapons fire struggled against the sheer thermal energy. Electronics failed. Crew members received lethal radiation doses through multiple layers of armor. Corvin watched in horror as his fleet began to burn, not from enemy weapons, but from weaponized stars themselves. The humans had turned their own star system into a trap, a killing field where they held every advantage because they had built the battlefield itself. All ships, emergency withdrawal. Fall back beyond the heliopause. Retreat. The words tasted like ashes, like failure, like the end of everything Kashari Empire represented. But this time, the human fleet pursued. They came like wolves chasing wounded prey, their ships damaged and burning, but still fighting, still hunting. They harried the Kashari withdrawal with savage efficiency, denying them the clean retreat Corvin had been granted in the first battle. This time, the humans wanted blood, and they were willing to spend their last ships to get it.